very normal. It's very normal to, have that fear to go talk to a stranger and provide them your entire life story, and then worrying, would they get it? Would they accept it? You have a choice in your therapy. You have also a role in collaborating with your therapist.
What is one thing you wish more people knew about mental health or mental wellness?
I do feel for adults with ADHD because I know that they want to perform, but it's just there's that aspect in their brain that's not letting them.
For those at home that feel like they want to start going to therapy, but they're not really sure what to expect, can you tell us what does a therapy session look like? Hi, and welcome to Discussions. Discussions is a show that focuses on education and social impact. Through this show, I'm hoping that I can bring remarkable people that I've met to share their rich experiences, both in their careers and personal lives. And for the first episode of Discussions, I'm going to have with me Norah Alissa, a clinical psychologist with over 13 years of experience working in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Norah specializes in family therapy and mental disorders such as anxiety and depression. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy our discussions. Norah, thank you so much for joining us on Discussions.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Of course.
Honestly, the first time I met you was during the UK Women's Health Talk.
Yeah.
And I was sitting kind of in the corner behind, I was literally behind a bush almost on the right side. And I was just taking notes. It was amazing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. It was lovely meeting you, and I'm so glad to be here.
No, the pleasure is mine, truly. To start off the conversation, I want to give our audience members a better idea of who Norah Alissa is. So can you tell us, who is Norah Alissa?
It's such a loaded question.
It
It's so hard to
It's a
talk
big
about
question.
yourself. But so I'm Saudi. I'm born and raised here. And then I moved around a lot, I think, starting from middle school. So we moved to Canada for a few years. I think that shaped a lot of who I am as a person. I did my undergraduate in Lebanon, and I think that built a little bit of resilience in me because they were going through a distressful time. I did my master's in the US, and then I've been back for 12 years now, and I've dived into the mental health world here. I'm a mother of a beautiful son, and a wife to a caring husband, a daughter to a beautiful mother, and a loving father. Allah yarhamu. Those are my facets as an individual, but more so, I'm also a mental health practitioner. So I love mental health. I've been in the field for so long, and it's everything that I know and care about, and it's nice to be able to give back to my community.
I like that your intro is so human. I feel like oftentimes people say, well, I'm a clinical psychologist and that's it. I went to school here. But yours is so human and well-rounded. I mean, you're a mother, you're also a daughter. And I think it's so beautiful to bring in those elements, human elements, into shows like these.
Thanks.
You have a platform called Be Well with Norah. And from my understanding, it raises awareness and spreads more information about mental health and mental health resources. Can you tell us what is Be Well with Norah and what drove you to create this platform?
Absolutely. So I felt like therapy is very an individualized process. So you see a client, you're between four walls, and it's just, you and that person. And I felt there's that lack of community work. And I created Be Well with Norah to provide more community support. I think we grow through connection, social connection, especially when you feel like you're not alone, when you're not struggling, when you're struggling with a mental health issue and then you feel like you're alone. So I created this platform to be able to have people connect their stories with each other. I provide workshops, talks, and the goal is just to continue to spread awareness.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I like that we talked like kind of behind the camera and you said it's a one-man show right now.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely
just
beautiful.
me.
No, but it's amazing. It is just you. But so many of these projects start with just one person, deciding they want to make a change, they want to make an impact, and it grows and impacts so many people over time.
I hope so. That's the goal.
Inshallah. You talked about it very briefly, but I think, even personally, before I went to my first therapy session, I had this, I don't want to say stigma, but this idea, kind of a fear of what a therapy session looked like. I was worried, do I need to start talking first? What is the doctor going to ask me initially? And is it going to kind of unravel if I say one thing? That was always kind of my fear before going to my first therapy session. For those at home that feel like they want to start going to therapy, but they're not really sure what to expect, can you tell us what does a therapy session look like?
Yeah. So initially the first session is an intake session. So you're sitting there, you're just getting to know the client, what they're coming in with, what their thoughts, behaviors, emotions are. But I want people to know that, and of course more so than that, then it builds on, a treatment plan that you you create together. I think I want people to know that you have a choice in your therapy. You have also a role in collaborating with your therapist. So it's goal oriented, it's collaborative. And I think for me, more so, therapy entails making the client comfortable, validating what they're going through and just making them feel heard without judgment. And then from there on out, you create a treatment plan together that suits, their needs.
Do you have any advice or any kind of comments to address this sense of fear or anxiety that people might feel before booking an appointment?
Absolutely. It's very normal. It's very normal to, have that fear to go talk to a stranger and provide them your entire life story and then worrying, would they get it? Would they accept it? I would just say, dive into it. If you already have that inkling that you want to go to someone, I think that's a great sign that, you need help and you want help, and just try it. You do have something to lose. I can say it's hard to say you have nothing to lose, but I think you have something more to gain if you actually do find the right therapist and the right, help at a time that you need it.
Yeah. And I think life is all about taking those risks, but the outcome of this, will be much more beneficial long-term for the person.
Absolutely.
I think so. With my intention with discussions is we want to help as many people that we can through spreading information and knowledge. And I think there's so many people that kind of battle with I want to say mental disorders like depression, anxiety, people, in our lives, whether it's family, coworkers, or friends. How can we as individuals support each other and help each other?
That's a great question. I think first is educating yourself, learning about, if your friend's struggling with depression or anxiety, just understanding what that looks like. Because we have predisposed, ideas of what might that look like. If they didn't want to come out, they're just being difficult, but they're actually really struggling. And so understanding what it looks like helps. I think being empathic, so lending that listening ear, allowing them to try to seek help if you have that role to be able to guide them to someone. And then just being able to do little things for them, like maybe going for a walk, things that can help regulate their mood, taking them out somewhere, just you and them. Like little acts of kindness, I think would go a long way as a friend.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I know, growing up, I go through kind of, I don't want to say phases, but sometimes I feel very depressed and I don't know what the reason is why. And my mom used to always do this thing that's like, let's go walk. And we used to live by like a little lake, a big lake. So we'd go walking there, we'd go feed the ducks. And it was like a big therapy session. Yeah. So there's so many ways to support. Nice. Speaking about being indoors and being connected to nature and wellness, you are a yoga instructor. You're a yoga teacher.
I'm not a yoga teacher, but I have my certification.
Oh, you're so humble.
But I have my 200-hour certification.
Mashallah, 200 hours.
Yeah.
Does that mean like you
So I can teach, but I choose not to because I feel I never got into it for teaching. To be honest, I got into it for myself. It was more about learning how to regulate my mood a little bit better, learning how to do poses in a in the right way. And I honestly feel like it's impacted me in such a better light.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And I like to pass it on actually to my clients that yoga, things like that, create a much better balance in regards to, issues with mood disorders and, depression and anxiety. So for me, I felt like it was a personal shift and as well as something I can use with my clients.
No, I absolutely love that. I remember my first yoga session where I pushed myself to go. I was so skeptical.
Yeah.
I really was. I think the idea of sitting in a room with strangers and breathing in the dark I was like, this isn't for me. I didn't grow up like this. But no, honestly, the impact it has long term is life-changing.
Absolutely. It taps into the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's the system we want to help regulate our mood. We're constantly overstimulated and active, so I find it to be a great tool.
And then how do you connect the two? Because for me personally, when I was dealing with anxiety and high levels of stress, I was having physical chest pain because of stress. And then my doctor said, why don't you go for a holistic approach, yoga classes, changing your diet? And within about a week and a half, I noticed a change just from yoga alone and eating healthy. So what's that correlation between mental health and then physical wellness like yoga?
Yeah. So I work in a clinic. It's called In the Inner, and they actually have a yoga instructor there. And I love that she, the owner combined both elements. And so I urge my clients that I feel are unregulated to join her classes. And then we collaborate on a treatment plan that we feel is appropriate for them. So, they might need, high intensity yoga before they calm down, or they might need a calming yoga to match their nervous system. So we create a treatment plan that works for them. And then in my own clinic, I use a lot of breath work with my clients.
Breath work. I like that. Yeah. I think breath work is so important. Are there I think I'm like jumping to the next questions
That's
about
fine.
job, but I want to ask you while we're on the topic now, because I mean, if you're working in a cubicle, I have so many friends that work in an office. I mean, as a journalist, I'm blessed enough to kind of like run around the city.
Yeah.
But if you're stuck in a cubicle, are there any like breath exercises you can do when dealing with stress?
Absolutely. One of my favorites is called 478 technique. So you take an inhale in for 4 seconds, you hold it in for 7 seconds, and then you exhale out for eight.
Okay.
And you repeat it a few times. The idea is why you exhale out longer than you inhale. It's to tap into that parasympathetic nervous system that I was talking about.
Yeah.
So I find that as a nice one. Another one is box breathing. So it's like you're creating a box. You take an inhale in for 4 seconds, you hold it in for 4 seconds, you exhale out for 4 seconds, and then you hold it in for 4 seconds again. But yeah, it requires a little bit of, patience
Yeah.
and time. But I think those are great exercises to do at the desk. And also movement. I think people that are at a cubicle for so long, their body gets so tense and they're just, so I think getting up and moving around the office for 5 minutes also does wonders.
And I think standing desk as well. I have one coworker, an editor, who has a standing desk, and I've always been so jealous.
Nice.
I'm like, this is the best idea
Yeah,
ever.
that's amazing.
I always want to be sensitive with questions and topics, especially with mental health. But can you tell us, if you're okay to talk about it, what are the most common mental health disorders or diagnoses that you're seeing recently?
So I've honestly seen everything. I've seen so many kinds of disorders here, even ones that I never, heard of or that are very rare. So I've seen a lot, but I would say the most common would be anxiety, depression, and then in children, ADHD and separation anxiety. I think that would be the most.
On the topic of anxiety, how do you go about diagnosing or treating it? Are there certain signs that people can maybe look out for to see if maybe I should go see a specialist?
So anxiety is it's excessive worry, and that excessive worry translates into your physical body. So I think with kids, you'd see them as they'd have excessive clinginess to the mom. They'd have stomach pain, headaches. You maybe not wanting to go to school, refusing to go to school. You'd pick up signs that they're anxious. Sometimes it actually comes out as anger as well. There's different ways of how kids react to things. In adults, I would say it's persistent worrying thoughts, lack of sleep. It impacts your sleep. It impacts how you eat. There's digestive issues. And then, worrying about the future as well. And I think I would say the most common disorders in adults would be panic disorder, social anxiety disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder. For kids, I would say it's separation anxiety. So honestly, anxiety is so complex. There's so many subcategories of it.
Yeah.
But I think excessive persistent worry would be the key factor, and then it impacts your daily functioning. I think that's key to be like, okay, maybe something's off. I'm not able to function. I'm constantly worrying about something.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a good sign to ask for help.
And there's levels to it, right? It's not always consistent.
Yeah.
Because I've had, when you said instant worry, I smiled a little bit. I don't know if the camera caught it, but I've had dreams where I didn't answer emails. And then I woke up and there's no email. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But it's reoccurring.
I mean, I think we're all anxious, I have to be honest, but like you said, there's different elements. And once it impacts your daily functioning, I think that's the key factor on when to seek help. But yeah, there's definitely mild, moderate, severe as well.
On the topic of depression, how do you decipher between, am I just sad or am I actually depressed and I need to go see someone?
So again, yeah, sadness, we all get these bouts of sadness sometimes, it can be lethargic, not wanting to get out of bed, just having a hard day. I would say if it's consistent, if it's more than 2 weeks of feeling that same sadness, I think that would be also a sign, when it's consistent and when it's for a prolonged period of time. And then as well, it impacts your sleep, your appetite, your view on things, your perspective on things. And of course, the more severe ones would be, excessively worrying about death, about maybe hurting yourself. There's also different facets to depression. So it depends, I think, on consistency and severity.
And I want to ask you, since we want to spread more awareness and knowledge, what is one thing you wish more people knew about mental health or mental wellness?
It's so complex. I think if we can look at mental health as a medical condition, medically there's so many different elements that come with a disorder. Same as mental health, there's environmental factors, genetic factors, biological factors, childhood experiences. So it's so complex. It's not just one thing. I also think, mental health, sometimes we feel like it's based on feelings, and it's not. It's, these are mental health conditions that have a basis, in our minds. And I think it's important to know that, there are a lot of major disorders that are treatable with the right care, with the right resources.
And then on the topic of youth, we talked about youth and how anxiety presents in youth versus adults. Youth and this new generation, Generation Alpha, I think.
I never know, by the way, who they are.
No, I only know because my little sister,
Okay.
and you could tell the differences, by the way.
Yeah.
Because even the slang, and I think they're much cooler. I don't know.
Okay,
They're like
yeah.
the younger
I
generation.
don't think they're cooler than us, but yeah.
Not as cool,
Yeah.
not as cool. But do you think that they're more open or accepting to mental health resources, or do you think it's pretty much the same as other generations?
I think they are. I comparing them to the older generation, especially here, I think they're more open to having mental health conversations. And I think, this is when screen time actually played to our benefit. It connects you with so many stories and different people and awareness. And I think so they're exposed to it much more so. And I think they're more open to seeking help and learning more about mental health than I think the older generation. I think the older generation, they think that there's still a stigma around mental health, or that maybe seeking help is a sign of weakness, or I'm not crazy, quote unquote. What we used to hear. So I think there's definitely a shift.
No, I've noticed that as well. Even older generations, when we speak about grandparents, like, we didn't have therapy back in my time. We didn't
have mental health issues.
Exactly.
Like, I think
they didn't exist,
but you just didn't label them.
You're just spoiled. They don't exist. You just made exactly.
Yeah.
But no, it's you see it. They're much more open to it on social media. Where I saw one video of a girl on TikTok, and she said, "Come get ready with me for my therapy session." So it's almost like she's promoting it. It's
this
inclusive.
Was here?
Yeah, no, it was on TikTok. It was in the US, but I imagine here it's growing more.
It's in the language, absolutely.
Yeah. We talked about social media. I want to remain super unbiased, and I just want to hear your opinion on this question. But what do you think about family vlogging, family YouTubers? I know since 2016 we've seen this peak of like YouTube family blogging, and they're making these videos about their kids from the ages of almost 6 months to a newborn.
I know.
And obviously there's no consent with children that age, that young. They can't really consent to it. What do you think about family vlogging?
Yeah, that's a tough one, honestly, because I think now, first of all, there's a lot of screen time issues, like aside of this, that the American Psychological Association is also shedding light on. It should be limited to a certain amount of time a day for kids. You should be monitoring what they're watching because they're exposed to so much. And as well, it's been linked to, more detrimental effects in the future, prolonged and consistent use of it. So it has its baggages. And then you come to, parents using their children in, social media, exposing them. I think the concern is now with the way the world is, there's issues with identity and privacy. And I think the concern is who might use that information later on, So that's the concern, I would say, for parents to just keep their eyes out on it. And then at the same time, children should have a consent on how they're being used in social media because they are part of it. So I think that's also an important part. You're making a decision for your child, but they should also have a decision in it as well.
Exactly. And I imagine even in the future, the child might, regret these videos that are online. And once something's online, even if you remove it, delete it, it's never really gone. And we know it's never really gone. You obviously know my stance. My stance is like super, super against child vlogging, but obviously it comes down to the family specifically.
Absolutely.
When we're talking about family vlogging, we can't talk about that without talking about parenting styles. And nowadays, there's a constant discussion and so many conversations going on about this is the type of right parenting style, a holistic approach, a soft approach, never say no to your child. So there's so many voices surrounding it. But when you're a new parent and you're still navigating through the books, the conversations, what advice would you give them on, I don't want to say the right parenting style because I don't think there's one true way. But what tips would you recommend for parenting styles?
Yeah, I think the most effective, it's called an authoritative parenting style. And so it's a mix between gentle parenting, but also, firm parenting. So you're still being that empathic parent, you're present for your child, but you're also placing boundaries. I think without having boundaries, then things can get very messy. And then, we need to also move away from the old style of parenting, which is focused on just punishment. And I think punishment, the child doesn't learn. It's very like, there's consequences for your actions without growth. Gentle parenting and, empathic parenting, at least you're teaching the child what they did wrong, how they can regulate their emotions when they're doing the wrong so they're, better prepared for the next time. And so I think that's the best approach, being gentle and empathic and at the same time firm with boundaries.
Do you think it's okay to say no?
Absolutely. I say no to my kid on that, But yeah, of course you have to say no, if you don't say no, then you're just they're just going to be creatures of like they're monsters. They're going to
Yeah.
have everything and want everything.
Yeah.
So it's your job to place those boundaries. It's just how you place them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it the no in a very firm way, or it's a no in a gentle way, and understanding what consequences happen if they go down this route. It's allowing them to be, I think, also more in control, and allowing them to understand responsibilities. I think that's also important. I always look at things as collaborative. They also have a role in speaking and saying what they don't like and what they like, and working together.
And it helps them with their developmental skills over time.
Absolutely.
I know my mom was, she's a very, very gentle parenting. I think she was a gentle parent before she even understood what the term gentle parenting was. I mean, she read like psychology books growing up, and she knew this is how I was parented in the past, but this is how I want to do it better. And it's so funny because we grew up always thinking, my mom was very stern, but she wasn't really stern. And now growing up, we're best friends. And she always said that. She was like, I want to be more authoritative growing up for you guys. But then when we're older, we're best friends. I think that's the best approach.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
Yeah. We can't talk about, I don't know how to introduce this topic, honestly, because it's so tricky. And I feel like maybe it's not as popular in the region as it is in other countries. But when we talk about preventive medicine and preventive mental health resources, where do you stand on that?
Prevention is so important. I think we have this mindset of, something has to be really wrong for me to seek help. But prevention is key in picking up early signs, getting early treatment, reducing the severity of the mental health condition. So I think it's important. And, shifting that mindset of, instead of, let me wait for a crisis to happen to seek help, rather than, let me work on my mental health and well-being early on, so I can actually be more resilient and handle problems better later. So I think prevention is really important.
And the topic of preventive medicine, what do you think about preventive marriage therapy or relationship therapy? I know there's like celebrities in the US, I think Dax Shepard and Kristen Bell, they went on a talk show and they talked about how every month they do a preventive therapy session, like a check-in.
Nice.
They don't have any issues. They just said we go and we just have an hour-long therapy session where we just talk.
So I know actually a few clients that do that, and they say it's added so much value to their relationship. It's not common, to be honest. Again, we have this mindset of something has to be wrong for us to go, especially in like marital therapy. But I think it's great. I think understanding that you want to be better and better in a relationship, because you're involved in, with a significant other where you have to cater to their needs and to, their emotions, and vice versa. So getting, help with a therapist that's specialized in this, and learning how to communicate better, how to compromise, how to handle conflict better, I think is great, because then you have the skills and tools to be better prepared for future issues. So I think more couples should do it.
Exactly. It's a partnership at the end of the day. You're discussing these problems. When you say you've seen some couples do it, is it a majority, or is it still kind of a new concept?
No, super new concept.
So not a lot of people.
It's like 2 people.
And well, good for those 2 people. I hope they stay together for a long time. Because I think it is difficult having that conversation with your partner, whether it's your husband or your wife or your partner, saying, I think we should go to therapy, because they might take offense to it.
Or like, we don't need it, or
It's a waste of money, it's a waste of time, we don't need it. But I think it's important having these conversations together. Can you give us an idea of what a session looks like for relationship therapy? Is it the person kind of bringing up topics, or is it the therapist kind of guiding them through it?
So for me, honestly, and I'll correct this, although my master's was in marital and family therapy, I didn't really specialize in marital therapy. I specialized more in family therapy. So I don't see couples. I do see families. Of course, you're within the family, you're going to get some relationship issues that we can handle on the spot. If I feel like it's something more in depth, I'll refer them out. But they have their own, they usually go through an assessment, and then they have their own criteria of, seeing some, for example, couple therapists only see the couples together the entire time. Some allow themselves to see the wife alone and the husband alone, although that can get tricky a little bit. So I think it depends on the marital therapist style. But it typically involves talking about the relationship, ways to better communicate with each other, handling conflict with each other. So it has its own, facets as well.
But I think it's a nice conversation to have. I don't know. I'm not married yet, but I think personally, when I find the right person, I might tell them, what do you think of relationship therapy, even preventive? Because I think it's so important having that conversation early on to see, are they open to it? Are they not open to it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It really says a lot. Let's talk about a fun little subject I like to call work-life balance.
Yeah.
I asked
That's what we're
someone,
all aiming
that's
for.
what we're all trying to
Yeah.
aim for. I asked someone about this. I said, what is work-life balance? He said, it doesn't really exist. He said, it's
Really?
pretty much a loaded term. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no equal balance. One will always overtake another. What do you think? Is it possible to reach a balance between work and life?
I think after COVID, that term kind of came more about, and I think it's allowing, allowing employees to do virtual work. And I think that's the concept of like, oh, maybe we can aim for a more work-life balance. I think it's plausible. I think it depends on how what boundaries you place for yourself. So when can I clock off work? For example, on the weekend, am I working or not? Am I going to work after a certain time? Am I going to have a screen-free hour? I think that's so important to like plug off the phone for at least an hour, preferably before bed. And then I think work-life balance comes down to self-care. So movement, exercise, hobbies, engaging in hobbies, creating social networks that you want to do fun things with. So it's having, it's filling up your cup in both worlds, your professional world and your personal world. I agree, maybe it might not be balanced the entire time, but then you understand, hey, if my professional cup is a little bit overflowing, I need to pour a little bit more in my personal cup life and reduce my, my work stress. So it's up to you to kind of navigate through both worlds. But I think it is possible, and I think it's down to placing boundaries for yourself and self-care as well.
I agree. I think it's up to the person. But I don't know. I have so many friends, honestly, that work insane hours, and a lot of them are consultants. And consultants, work nonstop. Their life is work essentially,
Yeah, it is.
and they feel like I don't have a life outside of work. Even on the weekends, I'm thinking about what am I doing on come Sunday. What's the next step? What advice do you give for people that are working and feel like there's no option for me to have an outside life outside of work?
Then you might not be able to have that outside life, but there is a point where you can plug off work. I know consultants are very busy, and I do appreciate that. And even on weekends they're working, but sometimes they work one day a weekend. So you have that one day off. That day, maximize it, sleep in, take care of yourself, move, exercise, maybe do one small fun thing for yourself. Maybe if you can't get out of the house and connect with people, maybe one small hobby, a puzzle, read a book, but little things go a long way. And I think it's creating these small habits consistently over time that will show more of an impact.
My next question is about burnout. And I think in the hustle and bustle of Riyadh, everyone's trying to run, trying to make it, whether it's their 9 to 5 or also maybe companies they started, associations they started outside to kind of try to build it up and make it in Riyadh. What advice do you give people that are facing burnout? But let me ask you this actually. How can you even tell you're burned out?
Honestly, burnout is like become a pandemic now. I think everyone's facing it. I think it's important to realize burnout is not just work related. It also comes down with caregiving responsibilities. So even caregivers can go through burnout. It's characterized by excessive fatigue, lack of motivation and drive. And I think those are two key factors. And then how can you navigate around it? Of course, there's also the element of physical ailments. So burnout comes with headaches, depletion in the body, not wanting to get out of bed. It's kind of like it's prolonged stress that hasn't been handled. I think it's a precursor for burnout. And how can you, navigate around it? I think it's important to seek help, understand what your company offers. A lot of companies now provide mental health care, whether it's through, awareness campaigns or even therapy. So I think understanding what your company offers, getting support from your peers, I think is important. Talking to someone, and then these self-care strategies are so important. Sleep and food, we think of them as nothing, and these are our lifeline. And I think once those two are impacted, then everything else becomes really harder to, work towards. So fixing your sleep and appetite is number one. And then working towards like little things like boundaries and self-care strategies. And I think it's important because a lot of consultants are struggling with it.
Yeah. This next question might be a bit niche to Riyadh, but so many people are struggling with the traffic in Riyadh and managing stress levels and managing for road rage. I see so much road rage on a daily basis.
Yeah.
obviously with the metro, the videographer is laughing. He's like, Lama, you see a girl, do you mean you're the road rage? It's not as bad. I've been working
Yeah.
on it. But no, I think with the metro opening up,
It
it's
helped
gotten a
little
bit better.
It has.
But if you're sitting in traffic for an hour and a half, hour, 45 minutes, people cutting you off from left and right, you're always alert, always stressed out, panicking. Oh, there's a fly coming to make a...
So
That's fine. He's
wants
coming.
To be involved
he wants to be in the conversation. We're inclusive. It's fine. But how do you manage or navigate stress? Like, especially when you're sitting in a car for an hour to 2 hours at a time every day.
Absolutely. So I look at it as locus of control. We can't control the traffic. We can't control our outside environment, unfortunately, but we can control, what's in our vicinity. Yes. So what's inside the car is in our locus of control. So for example, prepping yourself, staying hydrated, having that huge water bottle with you, a snack, maybe a favorite snack, listening to a podcast that you've been wanting to listen to, or music, or things that can make that car ride just a little bit more fun. And I think reframing your mindset of, instead of like, I need to rush to get somewhere, this is an opportunity for me to be alone. It's an opportunity for me to listen to that podcast that I've been wanting to listen to. So I think it's reframing and setting yourself up for, a better environment when the outside environment is hard.
I had a coworker recently. This was, 2 years ago, before traffic kind of got more intense, but he used to make phone calls. He's like, I would check in with every family member on the way back home. So for example, he'd call his mom, he'd call his dad, he'd call his grandma, he would check in. And then by the time he's home, he made phone calls to everyone.
And then he did a task of connecting with his family.
Exactly. Checking on people. And
absolutely.
Yeah, well, that's really good advice. Creating kind of like a little holistic bubble of peace in your car, kind of a serene bubble. I need to try that next time. I'll work on it.
And I liked his approach as well, making those calls and connecting with people.
That's what I started doing as well. I started calling my mom. It's a 45-minute phone call. I'm basically halfway home, and then the rest is not too bad. We talked about it a little bit, but what about mental health resources in Saudi Arabia? What are areas that we excel, globally in terms of mental health resources? And I want to be pragmatic about the question. Where are areas that we can still work on and develop further?
Absolutely. I think there's always room for growth. Absolutely. I think it's still lacking, but me and a few partners, we created this directory book a few years ago under the sponsorship of the National Center for Mental Health Promotion. And it's actually on their website. It's a resource list for mental health services. It contains hospitals, clinics, and centers, and early rehabilitation centers and private clinics. So it has a resource list of what's available in Riyadh. It's not updated, I'm going to be honest, but I think that's a good start to, at least if you wanted to see what options are out there. But then we still don't have a platform that provides like updated information on what resources are available. We do have applications, local applications that I think provide some good mental health resources. So we have Tuhun. It's actually made, I think consultants will benefit from this. Tuhun provides like meditation geared towards relaxation for like high stress jobs. And then you have Qaribun. It's also part of the National Center for Mental Health Promotion. They also put resources. You have Lebbe. They provide therapy, and then Citer, it also provides...
We interviewed Dr. Majid.
Oh, you did? Yeah,
we did.
So they provide psychiatry and psychology, sessions. So we're starting to get these, virtual applications available that I think people can tap into. It's not, therapy has changed. You don't have to go to a clinic anymore. It's accessible now.
I think you're right. It is changed, and it's become more inclusive. It's become more equal. I think social media and the internet is a digitalizer. It's an equalizer. On the topic of ADHD, we talked about it very briefly on how ADHD presents in children and adults. And last year, I think there was a trend on social media of like self-diagnosing ADHD. It was a proclamation that I have ADHD. These are the signs to look out for. But as a specialist, as someone who works in the sector, can you clear up some misconceptions of what are signs that someone has ADHD?
So I think ADHD, a lot of people think, it's just a hyperactive kid, but it's not. Hyperactivity is one element of it. It's actually a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's characterized by three main buckets, which is inattention, and then impulsivity and hyperactivity. So actually some people might present with ADHD without the hyperactivity, and they can just have an inattentive type. So you see those kids or adults that lack focus, they're disorganized in their life. They have issues with time management. So it's actually, it ripples down into other areas in their life. I think the misconception that it doesn't appear in adults, it appears in adults, but it's often either overdiagnosed, unfortunately now I feel like recently, or misdiagnosed. I think it's comorbid with a lot of other disorders, and so it can be masked. I think adults struggle a lot with ADHD because, it was missed, and they don't know if that's what they have. They just feel like, okay, well, I'm not hyperactive, but God, I can't focus. I might have something else. And so I think the misconception that it's only in children, I think the misconception that it's only hyperactivity, I think those are the two major ones.
When you say overdiagnosed in adults, ADHD, what do you mean?
I feel recently unfortunately, I've seen a lot of clients come in and they're like, well, I was diagnosed with ADHD and I'm on medication. I'm like, I'm not, and then when you take the history, you're not sure if they're actually purely ADHD. They could have depression, and it's, that mental fog that's coming with it is a representation of depression, not ADHD. I think it's important to get a second opinion as well. Like if you feel like something's off or it's not representative of you, or if you had a quick diagnosis and a quick, prescription, I think it's important to take a second opinion, give a fuller history, understand, it takes time to diagnose. I think it's not easy to just diagnose someone. Maybe as well do an assessment. Like there's also neuro assessments that can be done. And I think that's much more, it's more scientific than something that's just also verbal. So I think it's important when it comes down to ADHD to actually have a proper diagnosis. Because then once you're on a medication that's not suitable for the diagnosis, then you're kind of, you go down a loophole a little bit, of trying to get out of it and then getting on another medication. And then, so I think it's important when it comes down to ADHD.
But how does ADHD present in adults, and how can it kind of impact their daily life or daily work?
So, some adults with ADHD, they could be a little bit impulsive in their actions. So, they do things before thinking, and, they make mistakes a lot. An aspect of inattention, you can see them, focusing on a task for like 5-10 minutes, and then they're on another, they're on another task, or they're not just fulfilling every task equally. They're speaking and then they jump from topic to topic, So
Sounds kind of familiar.
They have issues with time management. They're a bit disorganized in their life. And I think that's how it maybe appears more so in an adult.
Yeah. But do you think it can impact their daily life when it comes to work? Does it have that effect?
Yeah, absolutely. They can't focus on a task for long enough. They're jumping from one task to the next. And it's also, it comes with the baggage of like, I'm not performing well. I'm not, so it also comes down with, there's an element of sadness that comes with ADHD because that there's something off and you're trying your best, but it's just not working. So I do feel for adults with ADHD because I know that they want to perform, but it's just there's that aspect in their brain that's not letting them.
Yeah. Do you think there's any strengths to having ADHD?
Any strengths?
Any strengths in adults?
I think there's a strength in having, any disorder. I think it's how you look at it and how you use it for your own benefit. I think I can't name them now, but there's a lot of, well-known, famous, individuals with ADHD that have managed and, used it as a strength. Maybe I am impulsive, but then I'm creative, and so I think you can use it as a strength if you reframe it in that way. Absolutely.
I have an off-topic question.
Sure.
And I asked a psychiatrist about this, but I want to ask you as a clinical psychologist, do you feel like you have a superpower where you can kind of read someone based on their behavior or interactions?
A lot of people ask me that, by the way, especially on my off time as well. They're like, are you reading me?
But what am I thinking now?
Yeah, I try to disconnect. I have to be honest. Like if someone really wants help and they're asking me for guidance, then I'm sitting and engaged with them. Yeah. But if we're just in a social setting or, then I am completely off.
You're not reading someone like, they're nervous, they're anxious, they're worried.
Not at all. Not at all.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Unless they bring it to me, then I'm open to that. But if they don't bring it to me, then I'm not going to tap into it.
I like that though. So if someone at dinner asks you, at the beginning of dinner, I want you to observe me, and at the end of the dinner, tell me what you notice. Can you do that? Like their behaviors, their communications. A
little bit. But again, it's not something I like to tap into because I'm not a mind reader in the end of the day. You know what I mean? Or maybe they're just nervous that day. Like I said, such multifaceted, like
Yes.
we're complex human beings, So I can't judge someone for a small piece of what they show me.
That's such a humble and diplomatic answer. Like that. Back to the topic of ADHD. Is
Yeah.
there any correlation or link between ADHD and depression?
I mean, they're comorbid. A lot of the times, comorbid means that they come together a lot of the time. So I think ADHD and depression, come together a lot. And I think it's the element of a lot of ADHD individuals are very smart and they know they have ADHD because, they're not focusing on tasks. They can't achieve certain, elements in their life. And because of that struggle, they get down. And when they get down, it's very easy to fall into that depression. Oh, then you know what? If I can't focus on a task for long enough, what's the point in doing it? Or I'll just never be successful. And that's why it's comorbid, because I think they know it's like, a child with high functioning autism. They want to connect with people, but they just don't have the tools. They don't know how to. But they do get down because they want to make friends and it's so hard. And so there's that element of highly functioning individuals that get depressed because they know that they're lacking in something, that it's very difficult for them to do this certain task. Or so I think it's comorbid and they come together a lot of the times.
Do you treat any high functioning individuals
With ADHD?
with ADHD or any other disorders?
Yeah.
And what are the areas where you feel like maybe they are lacking that you can work on them with? What's the most common thing they present with, or concern, I guess?
Typically, there's a social element. There's a relationship issue with, whether it's a sibling or a family member. And it's, if they're living at home, then you see that, other family members take on, their issues, or like, well, you're not doing this and you're not doing this. And so there's that element. So we kind of work on creating more of a supportive environment and allowing family members to understand what they're actually going through and what their triggers are. And so I think that's a huge element, at least in family therapy, that I work with. And I love, because it's nice to see the whole family come together to, help an individual. Because, we are social creatures in the end. So I think that's a nice element.
Of course. Have you encountered any family members that, I don't want to say hesitant, but maybe are against therapy, but you feel like the child might need it in that situation? How do you navigate that?
Yeah. A lot of the time, then one parent comes, and mostly it's the mother. I have seen, of course, some single dads come, but it is mostly the mother that comes. And then you give them information for that spouse, so they're kind of like relaying it to them.
Pass it on.
They don't need to come, and it's fine. I'm not, you can't force someone to come,
Of course.
but you give them the tools to give them, know, and if they listen and they apply it, then it's amazing. It's much more beneficial for the child. If they don't, then unfortunately, most of the responsibilities come to the mother.
For someone sitting at home that might not have access to therapy, mental health resources, but they do have access to the internet, what do you recommend that they search, or what do you recommend so that they expand their knowledge about mental health and wellness?
There's so much out there now, a lot of, I would just say make sure that the website that you're on is a reliable website. It's evidence-based. You see a lot of parents' feedback, and comments on it. So understanding, what this website, it's not just a Google search. I would actually recommend going on websites that are, valid. Also reading research studies. I know we don't do that often, but it's good to be aware of, okay, what's the link of this and this, like screen time with aggression, and then actually reading, on NCI or like, some reputable evidence-based research websites, and understanding kind of the correlation. It helps you be more knowledgeable as well.
I keep getting off topic, so back to the
It's
topic.
okay, it's okay.
Speaking of which, back to the topic of ADHD. We talked about how it might affect, daily life, work life, but more specifically, I want to ask you about relationships, partnerships, whether it's romantic or familial. How might ADHD impact that?
Yeah, it depends what you're representing with, like what the person with ADHD is representing with. If they're always inattentive, then, sometimes it's hard to rely on them for a task, then they'll be forgetful. So that could impact the relationship. But there's tools, like writing it down, reminding them, putting it on their phone. Like there are tools around kind of certain issues. Impulsivity, that could be another factor in a relationship. If the person with ADHD has impulsivity, then it's kind of like, well, you're making decisions before, talking to me about it. So it can definitely impact a relationship. It depends on what they're representing with. And then I think they need to find ways to manage the ADHD first, and then seeing how it impacts the relationship, and then managing the relationship as well. I think the spouse understanding how to deal more with the symptoms, and as well the individual understanding what the triggers are, and
Yeah.
so it's a little bit of, it works on both angles, individually and in the relationship.
I think it goes back to, the importance of having that preventive care, whether it's relationship therapy, whether it's family therapy. I asked this in another interview, and I want to ask you this question. Do you think everyone should go to therapy?
That's a good question. I don't think everyone should go to therapy, but it's there if you want it, and it's not, you don't have to go if you have an issue. So there's some people that, just want tools on how to cope better, for example, with, difficult situations. I think therapy is for everyone, but not everyone has to go.
I like that.
Yeah. I would say it like that.
It's a good way of putting it. We jumped around, but there was one topic that I feel like it's, I don't want to say taboo, but there is a lot of information out there on it, which is postpartum depression.
Yeah.
For anyone at home that doesn't know, what is postpartum depression and how does it present?
So postpartum depression, I think, is much more common than women allow. At least we don't. I think we think like, oh, it affects only a certain amount, but it's much more common, and it impacts now 1 in 7 women globally. So it's starting to grow. There's a huge physiological element in postpartum depression. So it is characterized by extreme sadness after birth, after childbirth, crying bouts, not bonding with the baby, for example, extreme fatigue. And just to move the guilt away from the moms, because I think it's easy to have mom guilt, especially in a new chapter that's supposed to be joyous, is that there is a huge physiological element. There's massive hormonal changes occurring after childbirth. And when those are depleted, like dopamine and serotonin, which is the feel-good, what's the word? I forgot it.
What the word is. It's not emotions, is it?
Neurotransmitters.
No, yeah, you're right. Neurotransmitters.
Yeah. But once they're depleted, of course, there's a physiological element of sadness that comes with it. And so I want mom guilt to move away, because a lot of moms saying, well, I'm supposed to bond with my baby. I'm supposed to feel good. This is a joyous time, and they don't. So I think that's a huge element that I want them to know about postpartum depression. It's much more common than you think it is. And there's a difference as well between postpartum blues and postpartum depression. So postpartum blues is short-lived, and it only happens in the beginning, and it's characterized as well by sadness and feeling fatigued. But then postpartum depression is more consistent, it's long-term, and it lasts longer. And it also, there's that difficulty in bonding with the baby as well.
And I think with so many moms, they try to convince themselves that I'm okay, nothing's wrong, or they gaslight themselves into thinking, I don't have postpartum depression. It's just, I just gave birth, something is different, something is odd.
I went through postpartum blues, for example, and I honestly, it was a difficult time, and it was through social connection with other moms that have gone through it that actually made me feel better. And I think with postpartum depression, I'm holding a group actually next month for moms, and it's dear to me because I think the more we do supportive group sessions for postpartum depression, it's key in allowing moms to feel like they're not alone, and that they shouldn't feel guilty to be going through this process.
Yep. It gives them that opportunity, that openness to kind of go seek help, to look into it more.
Absolutely.
So it's not such a taboo or odd. It's like we know about it, but it's unspoken. I feel like some people don't talk about it enough.
Moms, I think, struggle a lot on their own, because they believe that, they should be able to handle it, and that's not the case.
No, I have this idea that moms are givers. I mean, they give birth, they give themselves, they give their emotions. Their job is just to give in this world, and they really struggle. For us non-moms, for people that might have, moms in our lives that are pregnant or just give birth, how can we support them if we feel like they might have either the blues or postpartum depression?
I think being there, the acts of kindness that I was telling you about, it's just so important. Little things like, oh, hey, I'll cook you a meal. You don't have to cook a meal. I'll take care of your baby for a bit. Why don't you go for a walk? Or like little things that can get them to just go back to their normal self, I think is really important.
Yeah, and it's simple, but it has such a big impact. I mean, cooking a meal takes, 20 minutes to an hour maximum?
Yeah.
But it really impacts the person.
Absolutely.
They feel like they're supported. They have that community around them. Yeah. This is a very general question, but I'm curious to kind of pick your brain on it. Are there any personal stories or cases you've witnessed that kind of shaped your view about mental health or mental wellness?
All of them.
Oh, I like that. It's connected. It's nice.
I've seen so many cases in my lifetime, and it's humbled me so much, because they're letting me in on their journey. And I've seen some people that have gone through some really dark and heavy stuff, whether it's childhood trauma or domestic violence or grief, thinking that how could they ever even go on in life. And it's honestly their resilience of wanting to improve, wanting to heal, wanting to come to therapy, I think it's been so humbling to watch that. And it makes me believe in people again, in a way. It's through their, resilience and power. And at the same time, it just goes to show that even in the darkest of paths where you feel like there's no out, and I've seen some people in really dark paths, they were able to come out of it and they were able to live a fulfilling life, a happy life. And it just gives you hope, I guess, that, even in the darkest of mental health challenges, with the right care, with the right guidance, with the right intention, you are able to get out of it.
That's beautiful. I really like that. Are there any interesting insights you've gained from your work? You talked about hope, you talked about resilience. Are there any interesting insights that you've gained from human behavior in general?
I think intention. I think I've seen this as a pattern is, even with the right care and the right environment and the right tools, if the person doesn't want to change, it's very hard to change them. And so I think if they come in with that intention of wanting to change, I think that's a key factor in growth, especially in therapy.
Yeah.
Even if it's hard and, if they have that intention and consistency, it's they're able to do a lot.
There is one reoccurring question I like to ask all my guests on discussions, because with the platform, I want it to be kind of a tool to provide people with, whatever information they might need to pursue a career in the future. So for anyone that wants to be Norah in the future, for anyone that wants to be a clinical psychologist or pursue a career in this sector, what advice would you give them?
I mean, education is important, of course. So, there's a lot of undergrad levels and now that are practicing in therapy. And I think it's because we have such a high influx of, therapists graduating from schools and, not a lot of training programs. We do have, but there's a huge gap and we actually have a huge population in Riyadh, Yeah. But I would say get your master's, get your PhD if you can. Having that extra education is key in better training and better supervision as well. And I think another factor is finding the right work environment. I was blessed. I was lucky. I worked in a hospital for 12 years of my career. I just moved to private practice now. But working in a hospital, I think, allowed me to gain insights that I would have never gained in just a private clinic. You're mixing with different people, different sectors, working in inpatient care, outpatient care, working with a team. I think in this mental health field, it's important to work with a team, to have supervision, to talk about difficult cases, because you definitely can't do it alone.
Yep. And I think when you're in a hospital, you're exposed to more cases, I imagine, than private practice.
I mean, it depends on your workload. I mean, definitely, I saw a lot of cases, but, private practice, if you're working 5 days a week, a few hours a day, you're going to see the same amount. It just depends on how much you can handle or want to handle.
Exactly. Yeah. Just one question off the top of my head, when you said how much you can handle and you want to handle, you mentioned very briefly that you can turn it off. When you're sitting at a restaurant, you're not thinking like a psychologist. You're thinking like Norah. You're thinking very normally.
Yeah.
What advice would you give people working in the sector that are maybe finding it difficult or still very new and navigating, how do I separate mental health, helping patients, and then also just kind of being me outside of work?
Absolutely. I mean, don't bring it home. I know it's easier said than done, but really try to tap out. Like you did the sessions, you help people, and then when you leave, you try to not bring that case home in the sense of thinking about it, ruminating about it. What did I do? What did I do in the session? Keep that for your supervision. Keep that with your supervisor where you can talk about that. But don't ruminate about it at home, because then that means you're bringing it home. That means you're letting it suck you down, and that's not the goal. The goal is to be able to be neutral and separate. Self-care is also important. I got burnt out a lot when I was younger, and it's because I didn't self-care and I saw too many cases. And so I think self-care is really important, taking care of yourself, movement, sleep, getting the appropriate nutrition, seeing people, breaking out of that cycle of I'm just a therapist. Because you're not.
You're more than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it goes back to our introduction when you said you're not just a psychologist, you're more than that. You're a mom, you're a sister, you're your daughter.
Yeah.
And you're human at the end of the day. We're all human. We're not just our job. Imagine if I was just a journalist, I would
You'd
it'd be very
be
difficult.
interviewing people all the time.
Nonstop, never turn off. I would lose my personality, I think,
Yeah.
over time.
Absolutely.
Those are all the questions that I had.
Okay.
You've been so incredibly helpful. And I'm
Thanks.
hoping that just from this video, I'm not sure how long it was, but I'm hoping just from this interview, people at home can benefit. They can maybe take notes. They can go back, rewind, and learn from
I hope
from
so
you.
too.
Is there any way that people can kind of keep up on what you're doing, stay updated on you? Are there any platforms people can follow you on?
Absolutely. I have my Instagram account, which is Be Well with Noorah, Norah.
We'll include it. We'll include it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I post about my activities and things that I do in the community. So they can always definitely become and part of it. I also work in a private practice called In the Inner. If anyone feels that, they are struggling, if I'm not available, that there's amazing therapists in that clinic as well that can offer. There's so many, services and resources now. I would just say if you feel like you're struggling, or even if you're not struggling, you just want someone to help you through a difficult situation, or you just want better coping skills, go see someone, even you can do it from the comfort of your home. Virtual therapy now is available. Find support groups. There's ways to get help now, which is nice. So I hope I helped in any way.
So, you helped me. I learned a lot. Maybe I should kind of look into ADHD more.
No, they were great questions.
No, you've been so helpful. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having
Norah.
me.
Yeah, honestly, your time was really, really valuable, and I appreciate it.
I
Thank you for
appreciate
joining our discussions.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Discussions. This was Norah Alissa, clinical psychologist, who brought so much valuable information to help us better understand mental health and mental awareness. Thank you so much for watching Discussions.